Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 9th of January 2024. Words are sometimes so difficult. Considering I have spoken more words on this topic than I think than any other human being on earth. Like, I talk about it all day, mainly to you guys, but not only to you guys, to other people too. I still struggle to get my words out sometimes. God damn it, stupid brain. Right, let's go to the equipment section, the military, humanitarian, financial aid section, and we'll start with Olaf Scholz, who is coming up with the rhetorical goods here. Be nice if he could back that with some Taurus. But I love what he's saying. So German Chancellor Olaf Scholz calls on European Union countries to increase their military aid to Ukraine, stating that, quote, the planned weapons deliveries to Ukraine from most EU member states are not enough. He's taking the lead. He is putting his money where his mouth is in terms of Germany are providing significant packages of aid. In fact, the most in the world presently. There is no other nation over the last couple of months that has provided more equipment to Ukraine, right? Including the US. The US has taken like 3 months off, basically. The bit of presidential drawdown stuff, but generally, obviously, it's all held up in Congress, not providing crazy amounts of equipment. The Germans have stepped up. They've overtaken. They're now the biggest provider of military aid to Ukraine. And he's saying, come on, guys, sort it out. Lead by example, drag people along with you. Now, what I'd be interested to know is which member states is he referring to there? Because there are many states within the EU that are doing the same as Germany, but in terms of percentage of GDP, like they're just smaller states with smaller armies, right? So, you know, the Baltic states, Denmark, Norway's not in the EU, but, you know, so on and so forth. They are pulling their weight. Who needs to kind of step up? Is he talking to some of those big hitters? Is he talking to Italy? Is he talking to France? Is he talking actually to Poland? German aid from Ukraine recently called out Poland because actually recently they did an awful lot at the beginning. They do an awful lot on the front line in terms of, not the front line in the war, but the front line of you know, refugee crisis and so on and so forth. But have they taken a little bit of a step back recently, what with the elections going on and all sorts of other things and the border issues that they are having? So, you know, who's Scholz really aiming that at? But it's good to hear that kind of rhetoric. Now, talking about France, this is phenomenally good news. According to Le Figaro, France can supply Ukraine with 85 more Scalp EG cruise missiles in the face of Russian armed aggression. France steps up. I mean, have they stepped up enough? Who knows? There are currently around 500 air-launched cruise missiles in the arsenal of the US. None have been provided to Ukraine, says Michael McKay. So I would like to know where this has come from exactly. So let's go and find that out. Of course, the key thing to take note of here is that can supply. Are they supplying? I mean, they are able to supply. Yes, they have those. Anyway, what I've just found is this from I presume that's the 9th of January, which is today. France may supply Ukraine with another 85 Scalp EG cruise missiles in addition to the 50 previously transferred. Armed forces of Ukraine expect a significant strengthening of their arsenal thanks to supplies from France. According to Le Figaro, France plans to supply Ukraine with 85 Scalp EG long-range missiles. These missiles are analogues of the British Storm Shadow missiles and have already been repeatedly used by the Ukrainian military. So they've given 50 of these already. Are they going to give 85 more? Well, I'd like to know exactly where that Figaro article is, because I can't quite find it. If anyone can find that, that would be great. But it could be that there are 85 more missiles on the way. And if that does happen, that is obviously hugely significant. It's just whether that is definitely going to take place. Okay, Reuters reporting that the White House is gathering industry leaders to discuss defense tech for Ukraine. It sounds brilliant. That's really good news. It's 2 years into the war. possibly a bit late in the day, but nonetheless, good news. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who often gets a bit of a ragging from analysts for being a bit of an appeaser, not an appeaser, an anti-escalation warrior. He's a warrior. He worries about escalation. That he's deemed as being one of the people behind the drip feeding of equipment. Which, anyway, he's called this meeting that lasted 5 hours and included key members of the National Security Council. Apparently, they were discussing things like the production of weapons for Ukraine, focusing on the number of systems such as countering drones, as well as solving the problem of demining, or the problem of mines. Hopefully, something good will come out of that. I'm sure the defense, military, and industrial complex in the US is off their own backs, looking into ways that they can help, because, of course, the ways that they can help will bring them revenue, one would think. Ukraine plans to launch a network of chip companies by 2024 to restore the domestic microelectronics industry and produce missile parts, targeting a capacity of 50,000 chips monthly by 2025, officials said. I think the US is doing this as well, interestingly, because if it goes south there, if China goes south, then there's going to be a world shortage of microchips, and if Taiwan is producing a large proportion of those, then actually you need to do a bit of future proofing. In this context, Ukraine is looking at being able to support their own indigenous munitions manufacturing industry. So this is going to be really important for their own self-sustaining future. Right, Parliament in Ukraine, that is, registers 5 versions of the mobilisation bill. So this is the mobilisation bill that's going through. The one version is the government's own, and then there have been these 4 alternative versions that have been placed alongside them. I guess we'll see what comes about as they debate this in Parliament. But this is going to be super important, because one of the biggest challenges for the Ukrainians is their lack of boots on the ground. They need to recruit, but also they don't want to lose people by trying to escape recruitment and running off to other countries, because you get a brain drain, you get a labor shortage. You see what happened in Russia, and that's money going out of the country. There's all sorts of ramifications, those people not working but being on the front line, and you're taking people out of private industry, being paid by private industries, and bring them into the public sector, being paid for by taxpayers. So the government funds are then going, it costs more for the government to have a larger army. And so, recruiting, yes, okay, they've lost troops, but they'll also be paying for injured troops to rehabilitation and pensions and all sorts. So it becomes very expensive, and there are ramifications. It's easy for us to say, oh yeah, you need another 200,000 troops, just go and recruit them, just to pick them in this kind of way. Yeah, there will be ramifications for that, and those ramifications is like one of those dilemmas where like all options are not great for Ukraine, other than they get more troops on the ground, and that's obviously brilliant, and they need that to prosecute the defensive war, but it will come at a cost, of course. First jet-powered Shahed 238, which I reported about earlier, has been shot down in Ukrainian territory. The engine apparently was Chinese. It flew to the middle of the country. It moved at a speed of over 500 kilometers an hour, so that's very quick. Mobile groups equipped with the anti-aircraft guns are useless. They must be equipped with portable air defense systems, the Wasp, Needle, Stinger, that sort of thing, Martlet from the UK, that kind of stuff. Yeah, this is yet another challenge as the Russians adapt, as we have the kind of munition, counter-munition, munition counters the counter-munition, and you have this arms race as each side is trying to get the advantage over the other, both offensively or defensively. Aside from that, another adaptation here. Now even the Su-24 can carry the UMPK, these guided glide bombs, the FAB, the KB, FAB 500s and bigger. As I understand, the bomb can be programmed during the flight by the fire control system. So that could be another adaptation. Possibly they had to be pre-programmed before taking off. Now there's a greater degree of reactivity to what is going on with the target. So that is a bit of a worry and another challenge for the Ukrainians. Right, moving on to geopolitical stuff. I just want to do a bit of a kind of correction in terms of how I couch something. So yesterday I was talking about how the Romanians have done this emergency road building project to get a road up and running. Because the borders in the Polish-Ukrainian borders have been blocked by farmers and truckers because of the disputes they're having with regard to the Ukrainians taking advantage of the EU without being in the EU, etc., etc. And the Romanians have gone, well, okay, you can just come through our country and we'll build a road. And I was saying this is cynically just a very clever thing to do. And it wasn't a criticism of Romania in any way. It was like, this is clever. They're taking advantage of the situation. It will be a money multiplier in Romania, and all those truckers and all that haulage that will produce money, and broken down trucks will need to be fixed in Romania, and the supply chains for those garages, and etc., etc., etc. Just a good, clever thing for the Romanians to do. And someone rightfully called me out because I was couching that very much in a cynical economic framework, rather than actually they're also trying to help Ukraine, which is really important. So, hi JP, as a Romanian, I can say for certain you're wrong in your assessment about the road being built. It's not an opportunistic endeavour, but a genuine effort to help Ukraine. I would just argue it's probably both, but yes, of course. One doesn't build a multi-million euro stretch of road in the hope that some lorry drivers will spend a euro here and there. It's more that you build it because it's going to improve you economically. I think that point still stands, right? You're not going to build it just that. Again, it's this idea that there's no such thing as a free lunch. People don't build things just to be nice, although that can be part of the rationale behind it, which is what I'd argue here. Also, lorry drivers sleep in their trucks, yes, but also they use service stations and so on and so forth. Maybe the opportunistic bit is some kickback for Romanian politicians from the contractors, but that's another story altogether. That road is being built to help Ukraine export their goods much easier through Romanian ports on the Danube and on the Black Sea. Even if Polish and Slovak border are unblocked, it still makes more sense to export through Romania and south and east Ukraine. Just look at the map and you'll understand. Absolutely agree. I just think it's also all of that rationale is economic. It's whether it's quick economic, and it's the opportunistic bit is the fact that they've got emergency workers getting it done as soon as possible, because you've got all these border issues over there that I think that's a kind of cynic. But it is to help Ukraine. I don't doubt that at all. And the Romanians have been an absolutely fantastic nation, supporting in so many ways refugees. Matt Bishop, that helps with this channel, went through Romania in his escape to Australia from Kharkiv, and Romania has been an amazing supporter of Ukraine. I was being a bit cynical, but I still stand by the fact that most of the rationale will be economic. It is also a massive help to Ukraine, and that will be part of the justification too. Hungary has put forward a new demand to lift the $50 billion veto for Ukraine, according to Politico. Citing sources, Hungarian authorities have made it clear that they can lift their veto on EU aid to Ukraine, provided that the funding is reviewed every year. So I don't know what the situation was or is as it stands. Like, is the veto that they presently have only valid for this, and then they're unable to veto any other subsequent aid going forward? Because he seems to say that, right, I lift the veto if we have the ability to veto each aid package each year. So, quote, in practice, this would give Orban the opportunity to block EU funding for Ukraine every year or receive concessions from Brussels for refusing his veto, the publication writes. I don't know how that... I assume that that's how it would work anyway. So I don't know what that difference is. So I don't quite understand the intricacies there. Nonetheless, that could be a silver lining to that cloud. Wall Street Journal writes that Poland is hindering investigation into the Nord Stream explosions. I wonder why that is. The Polish government has allegedly been hindering the investigation into explosions at the Nord Stream gas pipelines. The Wall Street Journal reported on January the 8th, citing investigators who are working on the case. The Nord Stream underwater pipelines connecting Russia to Germany were blown up in September 2022. Investigations have been ongoing since then, but have yet to produce a definitive conclusion. Am I right in remembering that Poland were not fans of the Nord Stream pipeline originally anyway? So they might have been big fans of it being destroyed, and I wonder whether they could even have some part in the destruction of the pipelines. That could be why they're hindering investigation. I don't know. Whatever the situation is, that is the claim. Right, this is pretty nuts. Okay, before I go on to that, I just need to give you a bit of preamble. This is not... Don't shoot the messenger. This could be some kind of partisan, as in me being really politically partisan, but it's not. What I'm going to tell you now is coming from a deeply conservative Republican politician, right? So please don't think that this is me going, and being some kind of pro-Democrat or anything. It's fascinating. It does come from Tim Burchett, who I wouldn't say it's the greatest of sources, personally speaking. He can be a bit conspiratorial sometimes, but this is properly fascinating and would explain, or can explain, the behavior of some particularly Republican politicians in the way they are voting at the moment concerning Ukrainian aid. Right. Congressman says House members are compromised by Russian spies. I can't believe I missed this. This is back at the end of December. The old honeypot. Okay, on the Benny Show podcast, which is a really conservative podcast, right? So again, this is coming from this side of the aisle. Tim Burchett says blackmail schemes play on vices. If it's women, drugs, booze, it'll find you. Okay. So the article, and this is reported in a number of places, Lordy, there are tapes, and well, it's reported because the guy said it. I mean, it's on video. You can go and watch it. There are tapes, and they're being used to blackmail politicians. A Republican Tennessee congressman accused his colleagues of being compromised by Russian spies and moneyed interests who bed and then blackmailed them to sway their votes. In a Thursday appearance on the Benny Show podcast with conservative host Benny Johnson, Representative Tim Burchett waxed prolific about how elected officials, including members of his own party, become compromised in high-stakes world of Washington politics. The old honeypot, the conservative representative continued. The Russians do that, and I'm sure members of Congress have been caught up. Why in the world would good conservatives vote for crazy stuff like what we've been seeing out of Congress? Burchett, who was one of the 8 GOP members to vote to remove former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, described how the scheme might work. Quote, you're visiting, you're out of the country, you're out of town, you're in a motel, on a bar in DC, and some, whatever you're into, women or men or whatever, comes up and they're very attractive and they're laughing at your jokes and you're buying them a drink, he explained. Next thing you know, you're in a motel room with them naked. And next thing you know, you're about to make a key vote, and what happens? Some well-dressed person comes out and whispers in your ear, hey man, there's some tapes out on you, or were you in a motel room on whatever date with whoever? Then comes the suggestion that you really ought to be voting for this thing, Burchett said. What do? It's human nature, Burchett continued. And they know what to get at. You know, if it's women, drugs, booze, it'll find you in DC and in most elected offices. A similar, if less salacious scheme involves giving jobs to wives and girlfriends and then holding those jobs over the elected official to influence their decisions. Quote, and that's what people who have power and influence do, the long-time politician said. I've been in this game my whole life. I spent 16 years in the state legislature in Tennessee and 8 years as a county mayor, and now I'm in my fifth year Congress. The stakes are higher, but the game is still the same. Johnson pressed Burchett on whether he's personally witnessed this sort of blackmail actually happening and asked who was behind it, suggesting, quote, intelligence agencies, donors or special interests were among the players. Goodness me. So this is, again, not particularly offering evidence. So, you know, one needs to be skeptical, but like we all know this kind of thing happens, surely. I was talking about how Lindsey Graham turned on a sixpence. He's like pro-Ukraine, like massively pro-Ukraine, like going out on foreign television services and speaking on behalf of Ukraine as an American politician. Same with Mitch McConnell. But then he turned like that on a sixpence. Not to go against Ukraine, but tying it firmly to the southern border in a way that he'd never done previously. And that turn had to be underwritten. I said, look, he's one of the most compromised politicians. There is a lot, supposedly, of compromise on Lindsey Graham. And so, like, I'm positive this happens. I mean, goodness me, there's enough written about this. There's enough dramatization of this in films and on TV of this happening. And here we have a very conservative Republican politician saying congressmen are compromised by Russian spies. And that explains their weird voting habits. Make of that what you will. Right, Sweden is to send troops to Latvia to deter Russian Federation. Although Sweden's accession to the NATO is not yet finalised, it's ready to contribute to the defence of the Baltic states, according to Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson. He stressed that Sweden and its neighbours live, quote, in the shadow of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine, with Russia's threats, disinformation and cyber attacks being an attempt to destabilise all of Europe. So that's really interesting that Swedish troops are joining a NATO contingent in Latvia under the command of Canada, which is quite, I guess, confident that the accession to NATO will go through, vis-a-vis what's going on in Turkey with Erdogan and the parliament. I'm not sure that's been fully ratified yet, but it appears to be going through, and they're obviously very confident of that. So they're actually sending their troops to do NATO work or to work with NATO. So that's particularly significant, given that is on the Russian borders, and Russia. One of the reasons for their one of their justifications for invading Ukraine was concerning the encroachment of NATO, as he saw it. And what happened in invading Ukraine? Well, two more countries joined NATO who are effectively border countries of Russia, and they are committing military forces to the border of Russia with NATO. It's just such an own goal. Right. Massively important here. This is not Biden speaking, by the way. That's just a stock photo. An important shift in US sanctions policy in December. And the quote comes from a RUSI article, Royal United Services Institute article, which is a British military think tank, but it's referring to a shift in US policy, which is very cool. Quote, put simply, in its effort to restrict Russian access to key battlefield goods, the US government has made it clear that it will hold banks that process related transactions to account. Big. This is big. If a trader in Kazakhstan wants to buy microelectronics from France, they will need to make a payment, most likely to a French bank. And herein lies a vulnerability that the US authorities are seeking to target. The French sanctions implementation system has thus placed banks on the front line of sanctions implementation, relying on their AML compliance capabilities. US government is now calling out this reliance on the banking sector. Okay, let's just very quickly dip into this RUSI article. Well worth a read. It's only a quick read. Hammer time, when US sanctions patience ran out. So, like, they're going. The way I understand this is the Americans going, right, there are too many loopholes. The sanctions aren't having enough success. They are being very successful, but we need to do more. And one way we can do more is hammering how money changes hands. We can try and stop this component getting to Russia, but actually it's too difficult because the component manufacturer, the best will in the world, is not going to be able to control where it goes outside of the borders of whatever country. So you might have a US microchip manufacturer that sells it to this third party that says, yeah, we're not going to sell it to Russia, and they sell it to someone else, and they sell it to someone else, and they sell it to someone else, and they ship it, and no, we're not going to sell it to Russia, we're going to sell it to Kazakhstan, and then someone in Kazakhstan goes, and we're going to ship it to Russia next door. No one's doing anything wrong, and that's very difficult for sanctioning nations to affect. So therefore, it might well be easier to say, okay, well, who's responsible for how that transaction takes place in terms of the financial transaction for buying that component and getting it across the border? Okay, that's this bank. Well, let's hammer this bank. So, for decades, says Russi, banks, unlike many of the manufacturers now at the center of the sanctions raid against Russia, have been required to conduct controls to ensure they are not processing payments that facilitate sanctions evasion. In recent years, banks such as BNP Paribas, Standard Chartered, and ING have faced heavy monetary penalties for facilitating such financial flows. Banks have thus long experienced the responsibility of being on the front line of sanctions implementation, where they are expected to block transactions related to sanctioned individuals and companies. The latest step from the US merely ramps up this responsibility. Not only must banks prevent sanctioned customers from using their services, but they must also prevent customers engaged in activities that are subject to sanctions from using their services. In other words, banks are effectively being the policeman, really, and they're being forced to be the policeman of this. Of the sanctions. As the new executive order makes clear, US authorities now have the power to sanction financial institutions determined to have conducted or facilitated any significant transaction or provided any service involving Russia's military-industrial base, including the sale, supply, or transfer of certain critical items. Thus, while a French bank would be allowed to process a payment for a French microelectronics company related to the export of its products to Dubai, if those products were to go onward to Russia and the bank could have reasonably suspected that the Dubai entity was acting as a cutout, then it could expect to face the full force of the US authorities. Wow. This is really important and could be a significant shift in the ability for the US and for allies to stop Russia getting hold of such components. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I really appreciate all your support. Please press that bell. Subscribe if you haven't done so previously. It does help out, I'm led to believe. If I do repeat myself on certain topics, and when I do my mapping and I say certain things that you've heard me say 100 times before, you've got to realize that 50% of my viewers are new viewers in any given video. They're unique viewers. So if it's this horrible situation that I'm in whereby I don't want to repeat myself because I know I have a lot of regular viewers. But if I don't repeat myself, I'm assuming that certain people know stuff that they don't know, in terms of my thought processes and what's going on. So that's why I end up having to repeat myself. I try and do it quickly, but I do cover the same ground in certain videos, because you look at the stats and 50% of people won't have seen my previous stuff, and yet the other 50% have seen freaking millions of hours. So damned if you do, damned if you don't. Anyway, that's enough waffling. Take care. Speak soon.